All right, guys, Don Ford here, Progressive Insider. We are back with another interview with Dr. Dylan Burdette, who is here to discuss COVID-19 and what has been happening in this as this crisis dramatically changes by the day. I wouldn't just say that's true, Dylan. It's pretty hard to even keep track of what is happening day to day or report on it because the next day we have some new monstrosity to deal with.
Yeah, yes, I agree. I mean, it's the things that it's kind of a good thing because what science is kind of learning about this by leaps and bounds. However, it makes it very hard to give sound scientific advice if as the situation is evolving so quickly, basically.
Right. And sound scientific advice seems pretty critical in this turning point. Now, we're at this point in America right now where either they have to start issuing UBI to keep everyone alive, or they have to reopen the government. The red states appear ready to be the experiment. How do you think that's going to go?
I don't think it's going to go well. I mean, we don't. So first of all, we still don't have enough testing to find out where exactly all the cases are. There has been a couple studies that have come out of California recently showing that the rates of infection were actually much higher, which may be a good thing because it may point to lower mortality rates. However, it may not be a good thing because the tests are, these antibody tests may or may not be the most reliable. We may be looking at reinfections, things like that. It's really an issue of, and we can look back over the course of history to see how this works, or has worked in the past.
So, and I want to jump in on that. So the talk on that is that they're assuming something more around 4% of the population in this particular county was most likely infected by it. But the thing you got to remember is at only 4% of the people infected, at which point they pulled the plug on everything, the hospital system was overwhelmed. And so, and we also got to remember this slow burn activity, because I know we're going to jump subjects real fast, so I don't want anything to get left behind. When we talk about these protesters, we're already seeing those people show up who were at those protests in the hospital positive for COVID, but those aren't the people that got infected at those rallies. Those were the carriers at the rallies infecting people. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's probably a bit of both. In Kentucky, almost exactly a week after they had these big reopen the state protests, there was this huge spike in hospitalizations due to COVID-19. And those they could have been people that were infected by going to these rallies. They could have been people that were infected by people that had gone to the rallies and then interacted with other people. And they could have been carriers that just basically were at the rally and got other people sick.
I have an additional theory for you to throw in there, an additional possibility.
Okay.
As the lead up, because time is an important factor whenever you're talking about these math equations involving people and this factor of this virus.
Yeah.
When people were building up towards those protests, they were relaxing their safety protocols across the board. And before the protests, they were infecting people as those protocols relaxed. So like asymptomatic people would have been not wearing their masks anymore. They wouldn't have been taking the stuff. They would have been breaking quarantine and getting out. Because my understanding still is we're still on a 2 to 3 week incubation period. So whenever someone shows up from an interaction a week ago, that means they were just symptomatic or asymptomatic or in their own incubation period, at which point they can transmit.
Yeah, well, so the incubation period, it can be up to 2 weeks, but you can start seeing symptoms at time points earlier than that. But usually the incubation period where you're an asymptomatic spreader is 2 weeks. However, that's kind of a maximum. So if you see symptoms before that, it's not, out of the question. But yeah, no, the people that were showing up to these rallies probably for, a week or two at least were not wearing masks, were going out, were interacting closely with other people. We're going to house parties, like you said, your neighbors were having like a house party or something last time we talked, and that type of thing.
Making me crazy.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, like I mentioned then, we have one neighbor who consistently is having like large gatherings at their house like every few days, and it's very frustrating, to see, especially because. Sorry.
No, no, it's fine. It's fine. But I was saying we're getting a lot. I was probably going to go the same angle you are right now. Is the airborne nature of this? We're learning it transmits and carries much further than we initially anticipated. The 6 to
Yeah.
8 feet limitations. It's effective if you're wearing an N95 mask. But even
Hmm.
wearing an N95 mask and you're within that, you are still capable of transmitting this virus via your eyes or any other sort of exhaust port. You have, like, my
Yeah.
mask has exhaust ports. It protects
Yeah.
me, but it does not protect other people.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, a danger just being out in public. I mean, there was a study published, I want to say a week or two ago, saying that they found live virus particles in fecal matter of infected people. So like using public restrooms or things of that nature might be a source of infection, and it's these things that you are not really aware of. Um, another source of it, that's kind of a news source, is there's been a very interesting paper that came out a couple of weeks ago showing that this virus could actually start infecting lymphocytes, so the white blood cells in your body, and use that as a way to spread itself.
And you brought this to me when this first happened, and I asked a rather disturbing question that I anticipated you to immediately rebuke, but you didn't. And I said, "Does this mean this is basically?" Yeah, right. I know it's a hard thing to laugh about, but it was a funny reaction because I was kind of surprised
Yeah.
because I said, and this is no laughing matter. Is this essentially airborne HIV, like a less deadly airborne HIV? And
Yeah.
you
So
said,
I said, yeah, possibly. So no, the fact of the matter is, right, we can't do a one-to-one comparison with HIV because HIV does go into our white blood cells, and it integrates into the cellular genome and reproduces within those cells, and that's how it destroys those cells. Um, what we do know is that the MERS coronavirus will enter and kill T lymphocytes, um, but can't reproduce within them. Now, what this paper, the most recent study that came out, showed
so
was that
it basically is eating it, essentially. It's basically
yeah,
destroying it, killing it,
yeah,
disassembling
yeah,
it.
yeah. So what we've seen is that this the virus that causes COVID-19, the SARS CoV-2, what we've seen is that it can enter T lymphocytes, but the studies are currently ongoing to see if it actually kills these T lymphocytes. What we do know is that lymphocytopenia, or a lack of lymphocytes, is a clinical presentation of the disease COVID-19, making us hypothesize, yeah, that our white blood cells are actually vulnerable to attack by this virus.
Yeah, and so there, I guess it'd be better to say there's enough similarities between the two because now you're into the issue of this viral load concept we were talking about and controlling someone's
Mm-hmm.
viral load, and how like maybe getting one bit of the virus, like one simple bit, might not be a full round infection, but you're
Yeah.
actually breathing in a substantial amount more than you realize of micro
Mm-hmm.
droplets. I mean, you're sharing air with everybody. You are literally breathing in what was, and this is interesting stuff. And I know you're not, maybe this covers your thing, but I recently learned that your lungs are actually considered outside your body for medical purposes, in this sort of terminology, because
Yeah.
there's no white blood cells fighting in your lungs.
Yeah.
It's only in your blood. It's more treated that way. So that's also why we're dealing with this secondary issue where it can't necessarily be compared to HIV, but
Yeah.
it still shares these similarities that are very dangerous.
Yeah. However, one of the hallmarks of COVID-19 is that you get white blood cells coming into your lungs, um, and you have them invading the alveoli, and that's when you start losing the ability to breathe, and you start building up fluid within your lungs, and then you have to get put on a ventilator, because you do have that invasion of white blood cells moving into your lungs.
That's coming from the inside of the body to the
Yeah.
nose. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
feeding through
Mhm.
the organ itself, not on the
Yeah.
part the air goes into that is also inside your body. Is what I was what I meant.
Until that barrier starts breaking down, and then it starts to move
Oh, and
through.
then
Yeah.
you have white blood cells showing up in the lungs because
Yeah. Once
that's
you have
not
those
good.
barriers start breaking down, there's another thing. There,
That's just so the white blood cells just become another thing blocking up the
Yeah.
ability to take in
Yeah.
oxygen. Okay, so we're using these ventilators, and I know this is more of an MD question, so I understand
Mhm.
that, and we might end up cutting this from the thing, but
Yeah.
the ventilator question, since it's still about the virus and treatment, is technically something you guys cover. I feel like we're using the wrong machine. I feel like we're using, because the lungs are still working, like they still pump, and we're forcing oxygen into them, but the ability to absorb oxygen is being damaged. So I feel like
Mm.
we're forcing oxygen into an organ that no longer functions, even though it does technically still work. And so
Yeah.
it seems like, why aren't we trying something like blood oxygenators? I don't know what the medical term is for them, but like, is that something for like a long-term solution? Because I understand these are more emergency room items, and maybe I've asked the question too far, so feel free
Yeah.
to answer however you feel comfortable.
So the issue is that, yeah, you get the inability of the lungs to absorb oxygen. However, you also get, in advanced stages of COVID, you get scarring and protein buildup within the lungs that actually starts to break down their flexibility and starts to interfere with the ability of the lungs to inflate. And not only that, you also get fluid building up in the lungs as well. So
It'll
you have to
stop
get,
working as a muscle after a certain point,
yeah,
what you're saying.
yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
you would
Now the
still need to be
ventilators,
on a
the
ventilator.
way, yeah. Now, blood oxygenation at, exterior blood oxygenation, that could be an option. I don't know if that's being explored on the clinical side. I'm not a clinician, so I don't know.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
but what I can tell you is that another issue is that when the ventilators are used, they have to be used at a very high volume, high pressure setting, right? Now, another thing that I published on, this is way back in like 2005, 2006, for several years, I worked on studying ventilator-induced lung injury. So what I can tell you is that when you're using ventilators at that rate, and hopefully the person recovers, what they then suffer from is kind of a chronic condition called ventilator-induced lung injury, which is the epithelium of their lungs actually starts breaking down. I remember how I told you you start to get invasion of blood cells and fluid through the epithelial of the layer of the lungs, and this is something that may be a chronic condition that someone has COVID, manages to get over it, but then still has issues breathing for 5 or 10 years as their body gradually heals from this ventilator-induced lung injury.
Right. So we're looking at the long-term effects, and also it's I would imagine we'll do an interview here at Progressive Insight. We're talking about doing a larger with medical doctor, bringing you back, Dylan,
Mm-hmm.
larger than we did before, discuss these sort of questions more in depth. But I think that it just really begs the question of that there's some kind of juggle here, because I think that when you look at what the Chinese did, they used a balance of, now we can't trust anything out of China. But when they originally got it somewhat under control, they got a balance of Eastern and Western medicine together. And some Western practices, I feel like, this is maybe my non-medical opinion, but just from everything we're seeing from the newsroom, is that some of these things have to be readjusted in the same way when you talk about nationalizing aspects of our healthcare. I think that some of the for-profit models have affected our treatment that is making people more likely to die in these stages. And I think that identifying this would actually end up cutting our mortality rate down, right? Something like that. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, it's very possible. Like I said, with the things that we're learning about this disease and this virus, we are doing the best we can, but we can only do as well as the data, as we can only react to the data that we have, basically.
Right. Because we've hypothesized, you and I, since January about what was going to happen on different situations, and it's taken months to determine the truth. But not to mention the human testing aspect, because we are literally taking our testing from humans. That comes with a whole other level. Plus, there's no grand communication between all the hospitals talking about all this stuff as effectively, which is something when we talk about private healthcare, for-profit healthcare, we're missing out on this element of having our whole healthcare system in a giant network that communicates and works with each other for these solutions.
That's true. So, that's very possible.
So Dylan, what else is there anything else been going on with this specific thing? Because I imagine this is already terrible enough, and this seems like a pretty good reason to tell people to stay home, because you could catch this and you may never get rid of it.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, let's see. and in the bad news column, there is the fact that it seems that humans don't really develop a long-term immunity to this virus. So that means, the whole idea of herd immunity developing it's not going to work for us this time for this disease. When there's been some research showing that if immunity is developed, it's a kind of a short-lived immunity and doesn't protect from long-term. We're starting to see reinfections in some places in China and Japan. But this is, once again, we don't know if it's a reinfection or a relapse infection. We haven't quite figured that out. But what we have seen is that it looks like there may not be a development of long-term immunity for this disease, it's a very bad thing.
Question.
Yes.
Do you think that has anything to do with the mutation rate of this virus? Because they're tracking the genome pretty closely, and I hear two numbers get thrown around a lot. And one was like a month ago, we had 8 versions of the virus already. I feel like by now there would be more of it. But for most of data purposes, they've simplified it down to 3 versions. Called A, B, and C. And how C is the one that's really destructive that we're trying to keep wrapped up in New York and Italy. It's gone to other places. It's slowly moving its way across the country as people don't listen. Actually, so we're seeing this huge uptick. Do you think that further mutation rate is playing a big portion? Because this is a coronavirus thing. This is why we have seasonal flu shots. Yeah,
it's true. So I think it does have a lot to do with the mutation rate there. But even with that mutation rate, right, there are portions of the virus that don't really mutate, and those are actually currently being targeted both for one of the vaccine trials that's going on right now, as well as for an antiviral that may actually be very effective. This is a small peptide called EK1, and what's been shown is that it can essentially it can be given intranasally in mice and actually prevent coronavirus infections. It's been shown in vitro to stop coronavirus infection. Both the SARS coronavirus, MERS coronavirus, and the SARS-2 coronavirus. So that's hopeful.
Sounds like it's a type of inhibitor sort of vibe going on with this.
Yeah. So basically, the protein or the area of protein that is relatively stable. There's a lot of mutations always within the virus, but there's a portion of it that's relatively stable, and that is the structure of the spike protein. The spike protein is those little knobs that actually give the coronavirus its name, right? Because they look like little spikes. And there's a portion of it, actually an internal portion, that allows the spike to actually form and then interact with the membrane and bring the cell membrane and the viral.
This is basically how it eats. It's like Velcro, right? It like sticks on
it's how it sticks.
And injects, it gets the RNA, and then that's how it reproduces.
Yeah. So what's been done for this antiviral peptide is they've actually created like a truncated form of the spike protein. So what happens is when this virus tries to interact, it actually gets blocked by essentially a mirror version of its same self, and that does not allow the virus to fuse with the membrane and enter a target cell.
So it's the same reason it can't fuse with itself. So this is like because they have the same shape as each other. So by mirroring the shape of it, it uses the same rules about why it doesn't infect itself, and then it inhibits from infecting other things.
So essentially what it does is in order for the spike protein to move from like this little bud structure into like an actual spike where it can interact with other membranes, the inner portions of this bud have to interact with each other to stabilize this extended form. And so what this peptide does is it gets in between there and doesn't allow this form to be stabilized. So it essentially blocks the ability of the cell to grab on. Essentially, it blocks the Velcro, essentially.
So it's like sticking something in the barrel of the gun.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Okay.
So I mean, it's very encouraging. So obviously we're
it's a good idea.
All following this.
I mean, it's a really clever idea.
Yeah, it is.
we see this graphic of the thing. We see two graphics of the virus going around, and one is the spiky graphic when it's trying to connect with things, and then one is this like suction cuppy looking thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like you've described how the suction cuppy thing comes up to make the point, and this is basically something that jams its finger in that thing first, and that inhibits it from being able to do its process.
Yeah,
so it can't reproduce.
Exactly.
It's like protection. It's great. This is brilliant. It's a great idea. Love it.
Yeah.
I wanted to make another joke, but I got nothing. I'm very excited. That is very hopeful news that they figured that out. And so this wouldn't necessarily kill the virus in you, but it would prevent it from transmitting to another person.
Well, no, because essentially what it would do is it would stop the virus from being able to infect other cells within you, right?
Okay.
So you take this stuff, like I said, in animals, what they've done is they did like a nasal spray. And then what they found was that the animals that had this, essentially, the infection stopped, right? No more new cells could be infected. And so the virus particles, if they can't infect new cells, they just gradually over time fall apart.
Right, because they still have a shelf life, right? They got their own entropy going on.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm very hopeful. I just hope this doesn't give us zombies. I mean, every time we say nasal spray and easy solutions, and I'm like, I've seen this in a movie for sure. At least a couple of movies. Or this is the part they never show you, maybe for this reason exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that is very hopeful news. I mean, the numbers are not hopeful. I know California, we're looking at a full year of lockdown. They had no sports events until the end of the year. Very smart, because the second the New York bug makes it to California, that's going to be like the ticking clock towards D-Day. And we need to see if New York, but now we have Illinois lighting up, and we can actually watch it moving across the country right now. As people aren't listening.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah.
Well,
it's very frustrating, but
being in LA, I'm like, just stop. There's like a big line in Nevada where it's like, gotta really be effort to get over that mountain. You don't have to do it. Okay. Well, Dylan, thank you so much for being here again. We're going to do a larger, like I said, we're going to do a larger, group with an MD. I really want to find maybe an oncologist. I'm not sure who would be the right person to talk to about this blood oxygenation. I think I read about it happening somewhere. But I think that we need to be talking about the long-term effects of having people on these ventilators, because as this New York bug moves across and as this thing changes, I think we need to face the idea of having seasonal coronavirus. And I think if that's going to be, I know no one wants to say it yet, but I think as the public, we should be forcing our government to prepare as if we are going to.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, the government should be prepared for it, even if it, right? The government should have been prepared for this, for what we're in now, right? I mean, with early and strategic intervention by our government, we wouldn't be in a lockdown right now, but here we are. So, and we, here in Illinois,
how long do you think we have until all these states that are breaking protocol till they explode?
It depends. I would say a good month after they pull out their lockdown orders, we're going to really start to see cases shoot up in those states. Yeah.
Well, that's always how it goes, and I think that it's unfortunate they're playing with their people's lives, but this is what we're dealing with, and we need to find solutions based on the reality, not necessarily what we want, but make it what we want. And I hope. And here's the thing I gotta tell everyone too. And the worst part is going to be back to the zombie kind of, not making a joke though, but the person that hides their symptoms is the same person that would hide their zombie bite. Prove me wrong.
Yeah, it's true. No, it's very true. Yeah,
very true. So on that very somber note, I think that's going to be it for us. Dylan, any last words because we could just go on about how Trump really messed this up, but I just don't think that's the right vibe.
Yeah, I mean, that's just our reality now, right? So you could talk about that till you're blue in the face, but it doesn't save anybody's life. So
that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to save lives, and we're hoping that our audience is prepared for what is coming. I've already gotten a couple of messages from people who have commented on our work and said, you guys really gave me a week or two advance. I was able to go get my husband's material. We were able to lock down. We didn't have to search or run for everything. You got to remember, when the panic sets in, That's when people are breathing heavy. That's when that viral load is getting spread everywhere. There's major virus pollution, and that's where that's where the bad stuff happens. So,
and and for us here in Illinois, it was the weekend after we made all of our preparations. There was like 3-hour long lines at the grocery stores. They were all packed. Everyone was in real close proximity to each other.
No masks. No one had them.
No masks. Nobody had them.
Professionals couldn't get them. So
that's another thing. It's a good thing actually. Battelle's vaporized hydrogen peroxide, a re-sterilization technique, is finally up and running in other states. Like we have a facility here in our city in Waukegan that just got up and running this week. So it's basically because there's been this shortage of masks and N95 masks specifically for healthcare workers. There's been this push to figure out a way if we can reuse them safely. And Battelle, the company, had developed a method based on vaporized hydrogen peroxide. And they were doing this in Ohio, and eventually then they finally got the permission and they were able to now move to other states. So they are rejuvenating masks at this point. They can do 20 rejuvenation cycles on these things before the elastic starts to break down. The mask itself doesn't actually suffer anything, but the elastic straps start to fall apart after 20 rejuvenations. So I mean that's a good thing, right?
That's very hopeful news. That's very hopeful news. I follow someone on Facebook who was working on that. Rashid Tlaib was promoting his work because he was outside inside Detroit area, I think, and then he was then promoting someone else who had come up with a slightly better system, and I think it's the one that you're talking about. But the point, there is a lot of hopeful news because we when we cross our climate issue with our need for PPE, we can't talk about disposable at the level we've been talking about. We do need to figure out some way to make some of these elements reusable. Obviously not the gowns really, because that's their but the PPE, all these little thick items that take multiple rounds of production. Really,
well, and I mean the other good thing, right? We talked about our ethylene oxide issues that we have here in our community. So the ethylene oxide sterilizers have been trying to get FDA approval to re-sterilize masks. However, there was a big issue because ethylene oxide requires a lot of off-gassing, obviously, of these toxic fumes. But so the things can be sterilized, and then they have to basically sit for weeks or months before all of the ethylene oxide is off-gassed, right? Yeah.
So this is more of these chemical overlords trying to get their hands into everything. Like, just make it into fracking juice and leave it alone.
But the vaporized hydrogen peroxide, the waste product is water, and the masks are reusable after a few hours.
Right. And also they're really coming down on the idea that the major factor of why people of color are getting wiped out by COVID is because there are all these health issues from adverse treatment from these exact plants doing these exact things, and we don't need them making more of it. We need them making less of it.
And I mean, air pollution is now shown very clearly to be one of the main factors that makes people die from this infection, is polluted air. So whenever there's a good thing, there's a good thing, right? So that's always good.
No, I think this is good. I think maybe that's what we should do from now on, Dylan. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do. I want you to keep track. We're gonna keep a list of good things happening, a list of bad things happening, and I'm gonna only bring up the bad things because I'm freaking out. And then you're gonna be like, but good things, and I think that's really going to be what people need right now, because we do need people to know the bad things that are happening. We need to cut through all the misinformation. We need to make sure that Don's not just making stuff up. That's why you're here. And then and then we get into the nitty gritty of what people can do. And right now we're talking about air pollution. I just did an interview a couple minutes ago with Jacob Rosecrans, a assembly member in Oklahoma, and he's talking about how the oil industry is completely collapsing right now.
Oh yeah.
And, that is going to cut down air pollution.
It really is. It really is. Yeah.
That's the conversation. The move we need to make is not be having these things that are abstractly hurting our citizens so that they're more vulnerable, because it's ultimately going to cost us more money. And that is, unfortunately, the rawest, most Republican way I can approach it. But I think that's the way that speaks to everyone. Yeah, save humans, obviously. But that apparently doesn't resonate to some people.
Yeah. I mean, you can actually break it down into an economic argument. Either we accept these, this downturn in the economy, give people UBI, or we try to reopen the economy too soon. More people die. The businesses will still go out of business because they won't have workers or consumers to buy their product.
Yeah, the customers don't come back when you close the caskets. You can close the business store for a year, but you can't reopen those caskets.
Exactly. So it's really a question of, we can either have this economic damage, or we can have the economic damage on top of the huge death toll. So
right, because we can prop up the system, but it's back to the idea of, and I know we really keep trying to wrap this up, but you're so damn interesting, Dallin. It's this idea of we can make new PPE. A lot of these patients are unfortunately going to die already because of mishandling. Why are we risking our doctors without PPE when it takes 25 years to make a doctor from birth to school? And we're talking about rushing medical school for people because well, you're not going to be doing anything but COVID, so just go learn on the run. They're going to die anyways. And that is the disturbing truth of where we are. And that's why we need to be in this position of why we stay at home. We need to give our medical professionals this break. We need to give chance for a vaccine or a treatment or an antiviral or whatever thing we're going to come up with. Because it sounds like some very promising solutions. Now, what can you tell me? What's our timetable on testings? Because I know they're talking about opening up for human testing. Is this the same stuff that they were talking about?
So no, the EK1, there's no plan for human testing right now. It's still very introductory. One of the vaccines, the clinical trials are actually running right now, human clinical trials, but they are anticipating their preliminary results are going to be in June of 2021.
How long it takes? I get it. I'm like, oh my God, that's so bad. I was trying to with good news, and then that happened.
If you think about it like polio, right? So the polio virus took 50 years to make a vaccine. So for 50 years, people were just terrified and dying and being paralyzed by the polio virus. And we're talking, a year and a half, which is amazing speed. It just seems like a really long time when we're in it,
Well, I do think we need to move towards UBI, and I do think we need to move towards a jobs program. And I think this is a good time where we have crumbling infrastructure. It's a good time to get back on rebuilding roads, and we just need to figure out how to not make Republicans and corporations gobbling up every ounce of everything, which is back to we need to nationalize the whole process. Yeah. And then we're into this whole well, is there any chance if we get Joe Biden or Donald Trump in there either for this to happen? And I'm like, no. And so at this really important crossroads in history, and we need to, I guess, Democrats and everybody, because Republicans don't care, they have a real hard look at what we're doing and how we're doing it right now. I think that should be our big takeaway right now. Because we do have a little bit of time. We do have an opportunity to make some big changes. And I think that if we don't make them, we're just setting ourselves up for more of the same. On that note,
I agree. Yeah. Okay.
Note, I'm going to close this out because, Dylan, you'll be back. We're going to do more of these. Okay. A bigger thing. Thank you again and again and again and again and again. I'm Don Ford. This has been Progressive Insider. Please, if you are enjoying our content, check out our Patreon. It's Patreon Progressive Insider. It's pretty easy to find. Carrie worked really hard on it. She's done a really good job. I want to thank our first serious major, what do you want to call it? Important contributor, Dean Martin. Thank you again. We are looking to be saying a lot more names at the end of these videos. Eventually, I'll have to hold up a card and let's see, it's... Anyways, until then, again, I'm Don Ford. This has been Progressive Insider. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for having me.